As you can see from the title slide, Swandro and the sea are very much interconnected. What we're dealing with is a coastal erosion project looking at a multi-period site that is being constantly eroded by the sea. And it's an unusual site because of that. It's on a boulder beach. We're not dealing with the erosion of an exposure in the cliff face, but what we're seeing is a new understanding, really, of some of the processes that we see, not just from the big storm events and the big storm surges, but the daily attrition of every tide. And I put the map up there, really, just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we are on the Tabor coastline, where we are. But the map has a couple of sites that are going to crop up a little bit later towards the end. That's the site of Midhow, the red dot at the top there, and then the West Ness Cemetery. And you'll see how those sites have an influence to some of our ideas and research that we're doing at Swandro. If we look at the location of Swandro, it was originally identified as an Iron Age site. There's a little now there, and adjacent to that particular site are several Norse longhouses, and I say they're Norse. They appear to be sort of mature Norse in the way that they're constructed, and these were excavated by Sir Calland more recently in the late 1970s, early 1980s, along with the burials at West Ness. If we look at the topography as we see it today, this is an image, a model that's been produced using unmanned aircraft, taking a series of photographs and generating a 3D model. It just gives you the location of the now within that white circle. You can see that there's just an increased area of red there. This area is incredibly low lying. If you look at the now itself from the ground, you can see it's a rise. But if you look beyond that rise, you'll see that the area pans out. And what we're dealing with is a much larger settlement than just the now itself. And we've been looking at this over a number of years, just looking at stripping away areas of the beach. And what we've been able to identify is quite an extensive settlement that corresponds to that lower rise beyond the physical hillock there, the Dow. And on the beach, we're seeing erosion terraces that have been created. So the sea is cut into the archaeological deposits, creating a series of steps. And what you see, if you were to walk up from the lower part of the seaward side of the beach up to the land, you're physically walking in time. Each step is a separate period. And what we see is this truncation with part of the site being washed away. One of the earliest features that we found, and how we identified material on the beach, came about through a series of upright stones, orthostats, set upright that are used in construction, and these belong to an Iron Age building. So we just saw the tops of these stones protruding from the beach, and when one removed the beach, it came down onto our archaeological deposits. With the excavation of those deposits, what we have is a roundhouse form. The cell that you see on the larger pit stones, and you can see two little dark horseshoe shapes against the curved stone of the cell. But they represent post holes. So we've got a structure that probably had a mezzanine upper level within it. To the side, we've got an area of red, which corresponds to a series of paths. And then, if you go to the top, just immediately to the top of that, what we have there is, in fact, an oven. And you can see the detail of the oven on the top picture above the hearth on the left-hand side there. So that building is quite significant. It gave us an indication of the complexity of the deposits and the vulnerability of those deposits. So this combination of reasonable survival, but it really demonstrated that the work that we were engaging in was of vital importance because it wasn't going to be there. We could see the rate of attrition that had already occurred. And that building produced a date within the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. So that gave us a time marker. The slide that you see at present there is another building, and you can see that the different phases to it. We had an area of stone paving and a small entrance going into it. Underneath that was another larger area spread of paving underneath those in fact, they're tertiary walls. Then underneath that, still, we came across more material, which included the tank that you see in that picture there. And underneath the second layer of paving down, we came across that coin, which is a coin that gives us a really tight date frame. That coin was minted between 348 and 350 and wasn't that long in circulation. So that's a good indicator of the date range that we're dealing with. The other building that we came across was a structure which, in terms of architecture, appeared to correspond to the architecture we would recognise as being Pictish. So we're dealing with the later Iron Age, the pre-Viking Iron Age, and we had an awful lot of metalworking debris coming from that building. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that from the results that we have from that building a little later on. So we have a number of little interventions on the beach, and in 2015 we were able to put those interventions together. We opened up the entire spread. Oops. There you can see the extent of the site on the behind me going across the beach. But you will note there's this circular feature. At first, we thought it might be a rock when we first identified it, but with excavation, it seemed far more complicated. What we seem to have, and the picture on this side is of the monument as it was recorded in 2011, and the picture with the black background is the monument as it was recorded in 2015, and you can see there's a difference. We've been able to look at that rate of attrition, that loss from the sea, despite from both interventions where we actually excavated this, we very carefully consolidated it, repacked it with the best way that we could. The sea has had a huge effect. The monument itself is composed of a series of casement walls, and by that I mean we're dealing with a series of single-faced outer walls. We've got several single-faced outer walls, and that suggested a Neolithic chamber tomb, because that's how we see a number of the chamber tombs forms constructed. So that clearly identified that we had an important monument there, and that monument was sustaining a huge amount of attrition and was actually going very, very quickly. This gives you an idea that you can see part of that monument. We've totally lost the core material that we saw in between those wall faces in 2015. We've lost some of the outer wall facing. That's totally disappeared. And you can see the effects because the tide has come up over the lower part of that monument. And that's in the summer. So the winter tides and the equinox tides are going to be higher still. And that is having a huge effect, and as I say. One of the things that we try to do in terms of being able to record these monuments is to bring in new technology where we can. And one of the areas in which we've tried to do that is the use of laser scanning technology to create a point cloud with taking thousands and thousands of individual measurement points in the cloud, providing the ability to actually produce models and sections, elevations, and also to be analytical, to be able to take measurements as well. So this has been a tremendous boon to the way that we've been approaching the work. And I'll come back to that and show you some examples of how we've used that later on. The other thing that we're seeing there is, in the next slide, is that we've got other material coming up to it. You can see we've got a wall coming up to the edge of the outer casement wall, retaining material to the side. And we actually have some material that's gone away for radiocarbon dating, and we're still awaiting results that actually predates that particular wall. And it would be really interesting to be able to have those dates when it come back. We started to look at the upper part of the beach where we saw this monument, and we found an entranceway, a passageway going through. That passageway had above it the rubble fill that you can see there. We had a number of things that were of interest. We came across a coin. The coin is of Enred, who's the king of Northumbria. So that gives us a clear 9th century context. And the coin strongly suggests perhaps a Viking connection. Those coins were quite common in Northumbria and probably not ever traded within the Pictish context. The other thing that we're seeing on the adjacent image is a 3D model that's been created. But if you look within the rubble, you can see some articulated bone or semi-articulated bone. And we have the presence of several cats and several butchered sheep within that level. Now, what was interesting about the sheep and the butchery of those sheep, that it was with large blading implements. So what they were doing was there's several very strong cut marks in there. And again, the butchery and the coin, we would think that perhaps there is some modification of the site later on, perhaps in the Viking period. So, in 2018, we looked at the site and extended our areas going slightly inland to try and put that eroding element into context. And you can see the new excavation area is slightly darker against the lighter walling of the that's in fact the 2011 exposure. So the two data sets are merged together, and the building construction seems to begin to make some sense. What we think is happening is, in fact, we've got several things occurring there. We have the initial casement walls, then we have a secondary building within it, and then a tertiary building within that. So we've got a very complex archaeological sequence, and that secondary element appears to be a rather large Iron Age house. And what I propose to do is just give you a quick tour of some of the areas around that house. If we start outside the building in the passageway, we have a huge amount of structured collapse, and there you can see the nature of that. And if you look at the image at the top on this side, can you see those stones all coming down at an angle? So it's been an important exercise in trying to understand the formation processes, the whole biography of that site, and what actually happens at the end of life to that particular building, or series of buildings, as we now think. The other adjacent to that corridor, we came across a building which we had excavated in part elsewhere, further down the coastline, and you can see the fragments of walling that survive with this paving going across. What's interesting about this particular building is that it has a wall oven constructed within it. If you look above on this side, you see there's a large stone and then some stones at an angle with a little bit of red coming through. What we have is a kiln very similar, if you think in terms of the corn dryers that you see in the historic landscape. So that ties in many ways with having the flagged floor, because having that flooring gives you an area for threshing and so on. So we've been looking at that with some interest and trying to sample that. So we're beginning to get a greater understanding of some of the buildings with actually being able to interpret the surviving remains. What I've done with this particular slide, here you can see the 2015 data with the image of the excavation, and note how that is rather different to the black and white image I showed you. It came with the loss of the outer casement walling, and on the line drawing there, what we've done is picked out the area of this Iron Age building that's set within it. And we see a number of examples of Neolithic tombs with Iron Age connections. The How is a famous example, and the Quantiness, the excavations by Colin Renfrew, had an Iron Age roundhouse constructed within the tomb, and there are a number of other examples as well. So it's not entirely unusual to have this complexity on the site. Within that Iron Age roundhouse, we were seeing modifications, we were seeing events happening, and they include what appeared to be a later division of that building, and this appears to be something belonging to the late Iron Age or Pictish period. So we have a building with a long history of usage coming through. If we look at the elements of the original building, we have two rather large stones. If you look at the red and white marker, if you look you see the core of rubble overlying two really large stones. These are fallen uprights, so we have something of monumental proportions there. Those stones are perhaps 7 feet in length. Would have flanked either side of the interior of the passageway. But the thing about that area is it's been truncated. The sea has come in, it's taken material away. So we haven't got the same survival as we have on that landward side. But saying that, we managed to find structural elements, which included what appears to be a corbelled cell, which we're wondering whether it might be related to the side cell of the Neolithic phase of the site. And there you can see it in plan. There's a later feature associated with it, but you can see the capstone beyond Julie there. And if we to look at the cell, you can see it going off into the mound, and here's a detail of that going through. So we have traces of much earlier features on the site. The other thing that we did in 2018 was to fully investigate the Pictish structure. It had several places of hearth, and this is lower down within the sequence. It was producing an incredible richness of evidence. We were seeing traces of hammer scale and a certain form of slag which you get with fire welding. And this is where you're welding wrought iron with carbon-rich iron to provide cutting edges. And this has been the research of a gentleman here, Jerry MacDonald, for many years. He's cut up all the iron knives that were found in York, and has been able to sort of look at the construction of those. And the other thing of interest that we were getting from this particular site, it isn't just the evidence of ironwork. We're seeing an awful lot of copper working in terms of debris, in terms of mold fragments, and what Jerry is actually using there is a portable X-ray fluorescence machine. So he's looking at the chemical composition in situ of those floor deposits. And what he was seeing is the area that he's working on, which is an area between the hearth and the seaward side. He was seeing an enhanced zone of copper residues, microscopic copper residues that were giving this enhancement. We're also seeing fragments, as I said, of molds. The top artifact that you see there is a fragment of a queer, which is clay that would have surrounded the nozzle of bellows. And what was interesting was the position of that trier fragment. And in fact, we have a number of fragments. And then the opposite side to where Jerry is working there. You may see in that image two stones. There's a projecting long stone and a shorter stone. They're in fact anvils. So they're part of the metalworking equipment within that building. And what's quite interesting about the structure, if we look at it, there's a passageway. It's semi-subterranean. You go down into that building and you turn a corner, almost right angles, to go in, and you can bar the door from the outside and you can bar it from the inside. And the configuration of this passage going in, turning to right angles, and the bar on the door, presumably is in association with the metalworking activities, because your temperature control is going to be critical with the metalworking that's going on there, and it's the colour of the flame and the metals and so on that are so important to the smith, with copper working as well as iron working. So, with the artefacts that we're getting, we were beginning to get an understanding of that structure. So, as I said, you would go down steps into it, there's a doorway coming through. The area, the lower part of that image would be where the smith was operating. The area beyond, at the top of the image there, would be where somebody would be pumping the bellows to raise the heat on the hearth to the critical temperatures required. So, in many ways, we've got a unique insight into how that building was used in the past and how people functioned in that structure, together with the artefacts that we found within it. The other thing of interest was that there appeared to be something earlier going underneath that building, and we can see it in this slide, that walling going underneath, and we were able to go down and just investigate part of that wall on that side, when we'd investigated it on the seaward side, where the sea had actually cut through it a few years before. And what we seem to have there is a well-constructed piece of walling, which we at first thought was an earlier building when we saw it exposed in the cliff section. But with the results of what we're looking at here, we're now thinking quite strongly that what we're dealing with is the revetment of a ditch. So we've got a ditch, a large ditch, going round the site. We've just got the edge of that. Out of the artefacts that we found last year of interest is this little anchor piece. At first we thought it might be a knife handle. In fact, looking at parallels, and there are a number of parallels across Europe, what it seems to be is part of the bridle for a horse. There are a number of parallels that give us that indication. And in terms of pottery, we're getting lots of ceramic coming up. Standard late Iron Age pottery, but some of it was quite unusual because it appeared to have some form of decoration. You can see the decoration on those pieces there. A whole section of worked bone artifacts. Here you can see some needles and pins, and there's a cone fragment as well. If we look at the anvil, here's the anvil, and this became quite infamous, I suppose, because the press picked up on those handprints, those carbon handprints. What they appear to be is a combination of grease from the hot working conditions and carbon. So what we have there are a series of imprints of metalworking. The individual actually metalworking there. So we have that direct connection, if you like. The other thing that we may have or may not have is a possible Pictish painted pebble. It's not the most convincing of Pictish painted pebbles, but it has that carbon decoration on it. We will see in the near future if we Scagness produced probably as many pebbles as were known before we started excavating that. And what was interesting with the Scagness painted pebbles is they go back. They're not just pictures, they go back into the Iron Age, and we actually have a longevity of use going through from the 1st century BC through to the end of the Pictish period. I mentioned about coming back to look at some of the effects of the use of terrestrial scanners. This is Bonnie, who's completed a dissertation using 3D documentation on the site and some of her work. The scanner is a very useful instrument, as I said, because it can give you different representations, different view shades using that digital data. And there you can see those two representations. One, because you can cover that wire mesh with images, the machine will take a whole series of photographs at every station. So you have a mesh of point data which you can then overlay with a skin, if you like, that gives you an image akin to a photograph. I mean, it's not a photograph, it's a complete digital communication, but what you can do is to be able to put cross sections through that cloud any way you want, to be able to make measurements. And you can see that what we have there is an oblique looking into the site. Here we've got a section, and this is how we might be able to use it to be able to provide elevations. And besides just being able to get these visual images, the data is very precisely collected, so we can actually make very minute measurements. So we have data scans from different periods, and we can actually measure the amount of change that we're seeing occurring in the monument, whether that be erosion or whether that may be slumpage and slippage. Because one of the things that we've identified is that the whole site is slipping and tilting. And the reason for that is that there's a water table with the water coming off the hill, coming down for fresh water, and a high tide. The whole of the lower sediments, those archaeological sediments, are totally saturated. And when the tide goes out, it's like a vacuum taking that sediment away. So the whole thing begins to collapse. It's not very fast, but it's daily. So it's not those big storm events that are affecting the site so much as this daily attrition. And this is an image using the 2011 and the 2015 data. So where you have the green, you can see the amount of loss with the red and the lower part. Huge difference. It's just one way of being able to visualize that. As I said, one's able to look at the site in different ways to actually put cross sections through the site to actually provide a sort of cutaway, if you like, at points of your choosing. So it's a very powerful tool. So that gives you a little bit of background to where we are at this point in time. So I thought it was probably appropriate to give you an update of where we're going with the work this year. What we're trying to do is to expand our understanding by expanding the excavation areas, and also we're really concerned about the amount of attrition that we're seeing on those lower levels. So we've concentrated in trying to get a archaeological sequence and sampling from the lower ends of the site which are most vulnerable. In part, the two reasons for doing that. One is to give us the economic data in terms of the animals that we utilise, the crops that were grown, and the use of land, the use of sea from the collection of material there. Also to get a cultural understanding of people and be able to put that into a cultural framework. The other thing is to be able to give us a chronology, and by having a whole sequence of dates and taking multiple samples and getting a sequence, we can apply Bayesian statistics to try and narrow down the date ranges to get a tighter chronology. So we're working with Historic Environment Scotland and the East Kilbride Radiocarbon Laboratory to get these very precise dates using AMS dates, which allow you to date things like single grains of barley. So that's one of our ambitions is to get a really tight chronology, if we can, for the Iron Age, and bringing in other dating techniques as well, such as archaeomagnetic dating. It's a very similar approach to what Nick's using at the VES to try and here what we're trying to do is to redefine the Iron Age sequence, because we know a long Iron Age sequence. In terms of the excavation area, we've opened up a larger area to the east side to give us a greater context of those areas like that passageway that you saw early on, and on the far side of the site as well. Within those new areas, we have structural remains beginning to come through. You can see the top of the wall line just beginning to appear, and again the signature of structural collapse there. And it looks as if at some point in time, some of these buildings were deliberately levelled with material being thrown in. There seems to be quite a quick accumulation of material going through. The Pictish building that we saw within the Brock is quite interesting because we're seeing a whole sequence of things occurring there, which we're beginning to get a great understanding of. And in there we've got a lot of midden deposits, sequences of midden, and we've got a lot of burnt stone as well in those deposits, and it's beginning to tell a tale. And that tale, I think, is quite interesting because it looks like that building went out of use quite early on. There are several entrances going into it, and those entrances have been blocked. So that building has been closed off, it's been disused. And it seems to have been used as a receptacle for rubbish. And we're getting articulated material within that. And this image here, you can see we've gone down slightly lower. We're into a different spread of material back there. And as I say, some of this material seems to be suggesting that this whole area was used as a rubbish tip. This actually comes from the passageway, not that building, but we did find an articulated skeleton of a bird within there, so it's been thrown in. So a huge amount of material coming through there. The building that I showed you earlier on, that was what we interpreted as being a corn dryer and a threshing floor. You can see the top two images there. We've re-looked at that and investigated that, and have gone down into that, and we're now at a level which clearly predates that particular building with the image at the lower corner there. And so again, we've got a number of samples that we can just get we're hoping to get a very tight chronology for that, which will fit into this overall sequencing that we're wanting to get. If we're looking at the passageway into the care, you can see the new area beginning to emerge. We seem to have this outer passage coming through, going into the passage going into the monument, and there again we've got structured collapse. We've got material tipping in a very structured form. I mentioned the use of doorways, and the doorway that well, we have the block doorway here and the block doorway there. This is the lower blocking where the pole in black and white is in the centre of it. There we can see the blocking of another doorway on the other side. So we're seeing areas of the monument being closed off. And that's, as I said, repeated in that last building. So this is the second, the upper of block doorway. You can see the uprights and the blocking within it, and the structure behind is corbelled, and what we have is remains of lintels going across, and we're beginning to go down into the fill. So that was this morning, just before the heavens opened up and stopped work for the day. At the lower end of the site, again, we're seeing things of interest, and I'm quite fascinated by what's happening there because of this sequencing that we're getting. What we have is the remains of structure one. If you remember the oven, the large paving slab, and the area of burning. And what we've done is we've taken down those earlier deposits, and we're beginning to get a very good sequence of material coming out. And you can see the nature of those tip lines in the far side. And that's really interesting because it's producing pottery, which I would regard as being early Iron Age. So we've got material that is pre-Brock in nature. And we also have, from the lower deposits, that little pendant, which is possibly seal or maybe cetacean. But that came from that lower area. From the upper levels, where we think we have the North Viking interface, we're again getting interesting artifacts. There's this cattle femur, head of a femur that's been used as a window well, that's been decorated, and the other item there is made of bird bone and appears to be part of a needle case. So I've given you an outline of where we are and what we're doing in terms of the archaeology. The other thing that we've tried to do this year is to get a greater understanding of the site and its surroundings by being able to look at the extent of the archaeology. Now, this is a survey that is part of a much bigger survey that was done by some German geophysicists for the Archaeology Institute here in Orkney, and it shows Swandro. They very kindly included Swandro. You can see the noise that you can see that there's a number of very strong black and white signals there, very noisy picture, which is what you would expect from several metres of archaeological deposits with a lot of burning and so on within them. What we tried to do is, I managed to persuade my boss to come up, who is an archaeological geophysicist, and I managed to persuade him to bring his toy cupboard with him as well. So we've tried every technique that we can, and unfortunately I'm still waiting the results from that. So this was at the beginning of the excavation. We used different forms of earth resistance survey. We used radar and other techniques that are looking at depth, trying to get down all the way through the archaeology, so that we can have a profile of the archaeology that gives us everything from the surface to the bedrock. So with these techniques, we're hoping to get a much better understanding of the extent of the archaeology as we go. But just as a little taster, I give you an example where we're using earth resistance, but looking at different depths. So we're looking at shallow, medium, and deep. And then on the coloured image there, you've got the geophysical data superimposed over the archaeology. And if you can see, the very centre of the site is where the now is, and the big roundhouse complex, and the chamber cairn. And then what we seem to have is a very structured area around that area. And what we're seeing there is evidence of really quite major substantial walling going round. If we just look along the coast, this is why I said bear in mind the position of Mid-Howe, because Mid-Howe is a very good example that may help to illustrate what we may be seeing there. Because here we've got another large focal Iron Age roundhouse with its settlement around it. So we seem to have that repetition. The ditch that we suspect being underneath our Pictish metalworking building, as mentioned about the revetment, if you look at Mid-Howe, you've got something incredibly similar. This is one we did earlier. This is the site of Old Skegness, which we excavated in southern Shetland as a project, a 12-year project that looked at a multi-period site that gave us a complete Iron Age sequence from the 5th, 6th century BC all the way through to the mid-1960s, basically. There you see the Iron Age phase of the site, or phases, as I should say, because some of those buildings are later, some of them are earlier. But the thing about that site, again, was that it was surrounded by a ditch, and again, we've got a very similar stone revetment around that site. You can see the lower part there, the revetment of the ditch going through. So, what we're hoping is that geophysics is going to put that portion of the site we're able to excavate into a context, give us this greater understanding of what's happening. I kept mentioning the presence of Viking possibilities with the coin event and so on. I mentioned Sigurd Callan's excavation of those Norse houses. Unfortunately, it's not published, but what you see there is some of the photos that do survive from that excavation. And what's also of note is the sword that you see at the bottom there, which is a Viking sword, typical Norwegian type, that was found on the plains of Swandro, which must be nearby. I mentioned again the importance of West Ness, because just down the coastline, because here again what we have is continuity of an area of landscape where we have Pictish burials and later Viking Age burials, including several boat burials. And what's been really interesting is, even though this hasn't been published, work has proceeded on elements of the findings from those excavations, and in particular looking at the isotopic evidence for the individuals that are buried there. So looking at the chemical signatures and working out where they were born, where they came from, where they lived. And what's interesting is that the Viking Age burials that we're seeing there appear to be people that have come from areas other than Orkney. One individual strongly suggests coming from the very north of Norway, almost into the Arctic Circle. We've got some other individuals that probably come from an area, perhaps Ireland. The Pictish burials are Orcadian in signature. So what we may be seeing with the later use of Swandro is this cultural interface when Scandinavian peoples come in. And that story continues with those buildings in the Norse period, but it also continues with the work that Ingrid Mainland is doing with Dan Lee at Scale Farm. So the two sites, in many ways, are interconnected in this really rich landscape, looking at the story of the past. We owe an awful debt to all the individuals who have taken part and volunteered to be on the excavation, and to so many people who helped with the project in terms of funding. And I must thank, in particular, the support that we've had from the Archaeological Society here in Orkney. It's been really of great value, both in being able to do the work that we've been able to put forward, but also to publicise it with events like this and the publication, the Orkney Archaeological Review that the Society produces, which is a great way of being able to open up the archaeological resource that Orkney has to the greater public. And lastly, what I'd like to do is to invite you all to come and visit us. We are open most days of the week. We tend to work Sunday through to Thursday, Friday, but we have a specific open day event on Sunday the 28th. So if you're able to come and visit us, we'd love to see you. And thank you very much for your for coming to see us tonight. And it's much appreciated, the effort that you made, especially with the weather as it is at the moment. It's not been the most of advertising years for excavating. I think we've all found it quite challenging, especially when you have the sea coming in, as well as the rain from upstairs. So thank you very much.